In an exasperating adherence to current form, I thought I might take the time to review another platformer. This one is also puzzle-based and goes by the name of So Many Me. Developed by Extend Studio and published by Origo Games, So Many Me struck me as a game that attempted to provide a polished version of pre-existing concepts rather than to attempt anything especially original in terms of mechanics. I hasten to add that this is a perfectly valid approach to game design, and applaud the marketers for choosing not to pretend that the notion of a 2D puzzle platformer was an unprecedented stroke of Promethean inspiration. Given the increasing levels of saturation in the Steam store matched with a general increase in low-quality games, it's becoming more common for a store page to feature optimistically abstract interpretations of the products available. For example, when Minecraft clones are alleged not to be paler versions of the original model, or when shooters like Arma claim to be anything other than tedious, dismal wank. Shuffling awkwardly back on topic, you play as a small green oval named Filo, along with his many clones that get collected in transit. Beyond that, the game quickly establishes that the storyline only had one or fewer shits given about it by essentially telling the player that it's not remotely important. Focus is immediately given to the gameplay instead, and from the way the elderly Asimov is used as your exasperated mentor, along with his flippant use of the phrase kids these days, it's almost implied that this is a generational thing, with the idea being that there's no point in developing a story for a game aimed at a younger generation of gamers, due to the surge in popularity of mindless dreck, further examples of which I shan't give due to fear of alienation. This probably unintentional implication is undermined in any case by the fact that the story is basically the same as the original Sonic game, albeit that your friends are stolen away at the end of each stage rather than rescued. Puzzles in the game progress in a similar fashion to the Swapper, one of the more similar contemporaries of So Many Me. Your clones pick up powers on top of the ability to turn into stepping stones, which allow them to overcome certain platforming challenges and enemies. Soon enough, obstacles are introduced that prevent those powers being used in certain places, and careful sequential deployment of your Miis, as they're known, becomes essential. There are general signs of a difficulty curve for each of the different zones in the game, though on a few occasions I found an earlier level to be much harder than most of the later ones, and so the consistency wasn't necessarily immaculate. Incidentally, those different zones are fairly cliched environments, and none of them are particularly good looking. Another minor issue with the visuals was the weird use of capitals and the abundance of typos in the dialogue. I'm guessing no one else cares as much as me, but someone has to think of the children. I also wasn't convinced by the different enemy sprites because there was something about their respective art styles that didn't quite seem to match. One arrow So Many Me does have in its aesthetic quiver is the multitude of costumes for the clones which you can unlock by completing puzzles. There's also the adorable dinosaur suit and the elephant tank, which was a favourite of mine. The gameplay was generally solid, and unlike KR17, the platforming and boss fights generally consisted of short iterations of playtime that managed to challenge me without frustrating me much. Respawns are quick, there's plenty of checkpoints, and there's a nice resume feature from the main menu that makes the game easy to pick up and put down as you please. The levels are fairly well designed and often quite short. In fact, the majority of the puzzles are non-essential and are just there to reward you with costumes, extra Miis, or coins that can be traded for upgrades and add-ons back at the main area. These puzzles are generally satisfying to solve, and you'd be shortchanging yourself by willfully skipping past them in order to finish the game sooner. Not least because the collectibles all have a degree of purpose and are ostensibly worth collecting. But what this does mean is that particularly tricky sections that might cause the player to lose interest can be happily ignored. Perhaps the best argument for the case that So Many Me is a good puzzle platformer is the fact that for the most part, the more complex platforming sections are kept in their own non-essential pen, known in the game as Chrono Castle, possibly because it transports the player to a time when many games were based around platforming rather than being fun. In any case, the developers deserve credit for separating the shit from the cornflakes. There are other imperfections, such as this screen shake bug and the fact that there was screen shake to begin with. The frame rate goes a bit iffy when I record it in spite of what the software's frame counter claims, and yes, it is a bit iOS-y. But the puzzles are satisfying, the sound effects and music are unintrusive and conducive to a casual and relaxed experience. It accomplishes as much as you'd expect, and about as much as it aimed for. It's not a bad game, and doesn't deserve the unceremonial burial in the veritable ocean of puzzle platformers that most likely awaits it as the good ship Steam inexorably approaches the Disura Triangle. Anyway, sleep well.